"Stop those bulldozers right now," I screamed, my voice drowned out by the roaring engines of 3 massive yellow machines forming a wall across my farm entrance. Eleanor Montgomery approached with armed guards, her designer heels sinking into my soil as she waved eviction papers in the air. "These 3 bulldozers are just the beginning, Mr. Harper," she said smugly. "By sundown, your pathetic little farm becomes our new luxury clubhouse." Blood pounded in my ears as neighbors filmed the confrontation from behind their fences and car windows. This power-hungry HOA leader had no idea I secretly owned the entire county, including the land beneath her feet. And her world was about to implode spectacularly. It all started on what should have been a peaceful spring morning. I was watering my vegetable garden behind my modest wooden house, enjoying the quiet life I'd built after leaving the chaos of Silicon Valley 15 years ago. The farm wasn't much, 20 acres with a simple cabin, some barns, and vegetable patches, but it was everything I wanted. No corporate politics, no investors breathing down my neck, just me and the land. That morning, I noticed the mail carrier dropping something in my box at the end of the dirt driveway. Usually, I didn't get much mail out here in Pinewood County, so I was curious. I set down my watering can and walked over, the dew still fresh on the grass beneath my worn boots. The envelope looked official, cream-colored with a gold-embossed logo that read Riverside Estates Homeowners Association. I frowned as I tore it open and scanned the contents quickly. It was a notice demanding that I maintain appropriate aesthetic standards by cutting my overgrown lawn and removing what they called unsightly farm equipment from view. The letter stated I was diminishing property values in the area and gave me 7 days to comply. I couldn't help but chuckle. My property wasn't even part of their fancy development, which had sprung up about half a mile down the road over the past few years. I'd watched with mild interest as mansions with perfectly manicured lawns replaced the old Henderson dairy farm. Instead of tossing the letter like I initially wanted to, I decided to reply politely. I wrote a simple note. "I'm not part of your HOA. Please don't send me any more notices." I signed it, drove into town, and dropped it in their fancy mailbox at the entrance to Riverside Estates. I figured that would be the end of it. How wrong I was. Over the next week, I received 3 more letters, each more threatening than the last. The final one mentioned legal action and community standards enforcement. It seemed ridiculous, but I was beginning to feel uneasy. I decided to head into town to pick up some supplies and maybe mention this to my old friend Tom Westbrook, who happened to be the county's most experienced attorney. As luck would have it, I ran into Eleanor Montgomery herself at Parker's General Store. I recognized her immediately from the photos in the local paper, always at some charity event or ribbon cutting, perfectly coiffed blonde hair, designer clothes that seemed wildly impractical for our rural community. I was in my usual attire, worn jeans, flannel shirt, and work boots, examining some tomato seedlings when I heard her loud voice carrying across the store. And then I told him, "If you can't afford the HOA fees, perhaps Riverside isn't for you," she said to her companion, another elegantly dressed woman who nodded appreciatively. They both laughed, a sound like glass breaking. I tried to mind my own business, but as I approached the checkout, Eleanor spotted me. Her eyes narrowed slightly, taking in my appearance with obvious disdain. "You must be from one of the outlying areas," she said, the pause making it clear what she thought of those who lived outside her pristine development. I nodded politely, extending my hand. "Frank Harper. I own the farm down Willow Road." Her perfectly manicured hand barely touched mine before withdrawing. Yes. I believe we've been corresponding about some issues." Her companion smirked, and I noticed Eleanor signing her credit card receipt with her left hand. Interesting, since the driver's license she'd pulled out earlier indicated she was right-handed. A small detail, but one that caught my attention. "Those weren't issues, Miss Montgomery," I replied calmly. "That was you sending demands to property that doesn't belong to your association." Her smile tightened. "Well, Mr. Harper, things change. Riverside is expanding. We're bringing prosperity to this backward little county." You should be grateful." With that, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood floor. I finished my shopping and headed straight to Tom's office. As I was driving, I noticed a group of men with surveying equipment at the edge of my property. When I slowed down to ask what they were doing, they quickly packed up and left without answering. Tom's office was in the old brick building on Main Street, a place filled with character, worn leather chairs, bookshelves stacked with actual books, and a lingering smell of pipe tobacco, though he'd quit years ago. He listened carefully as I explained what had been happening, his weathered face growing increasingly concerned. "Frank, you need to be careful," he said finally. "This HOA has been buying influence all over the county. They've got the mayor, half the council, even the planning commission in their pocket. They're planning something big." I drove home that evening with an uneasy feeling. When I reached my driveway, I found a formal notice taped to my mailbox from the town stating that my access road would be temporarily closed for infrastructure development related to the new residential expansion. No timeline was given. As I stared at the paper, my phone rang. It was Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly neighbor who'd lived in the area even longer than I had. "Frank, dear, I'm worried. I just overheard at the council meeting they're claiming your farm is now in their development zone. They're moving fast." I thanked her and hung up, my mind racing. That night, I went to the old oak floorboards in my bedroom and pried up the loose one that concealed my hidden safe. Inside were documents I'd hoped never to need: property deeds, corporate papers, bank statements, evidence of a past life I'd left behind. I picked up my phone and called Tom. "I think it's time we use these papers," I said quietly. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Are you sure?" Tom asked. "Once this starts, there's no going back." I thought about Eleanor's smug smile, about the surveyors on my land, about the bulldozers that would surely come next. "I'm sure," I replied. "It's time." Tom and I met at his office early the next morning, before the town was fully awake. The sun was just peeking over the eastern hills as I parked my old pickup behind his building. I brought the weathered leather portfolio containing documents that proved I owned not just my farm, but a significant portion of Pinewood County's land. After leaving my tech company 15 years ago, I had quietly invested my fortune in land, the one thing they weren't making any more of, as the old saying goes. Tom locked the office door behind me and pulled the blinds. "Let's see what we're working with," he said, clearing space on his oak desk. "Here's the situation," he continued, spreading out maps of the county with property lines clearly marked. "Eleanor and the HOA have been bribing officials to push through their expansion plans. Mayor Anderson is in deep. He's approved permits without proper review, waived environmental studies, the works." Tom's face looked more tired than usual, and I wondered if there was something he wasn't telling me. "There's more," he continued. "Remember that local bank you helped 5 years ago? The one that was about to go under during the financial crisis?" I nodded. I had quietly provided capital to keep Pinewood Community Bank afloat, with no fanfare or publicity. "Well," Tom said, "that bank holds most of the mortgages for Riverside Estates. You've got financial leverage you could use if needed." He was interrupted by a knock at the door. He frowned. We weren't expecting anyone. He peered through the blinds and then relaxed slightly. "It's Rebecca Wilson from the Pinewood Gazette," he said. I nodded, and he let her in. Rebecca was in her mid-30s, with intelligent eyes and a determined set to her jaw. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, "but I heard Frank was here. I'm working on a story about the HOA's land grab. They're not just targeting your farm, Frank. They're pushing out farmers all over the east side." I studied her carefully. The Pinewood Gazette was a small operation, and I wasn't sure if I could trust her. "Why are you interested in this?" I asked. Rebecca's expression hardened. 2 years ago, I investigated some financial irregularities at Riverside. Suddenly, my sources disappeared. My editor killed the story, and I was demoted to covering school board meetings. Then I found out Eleanor had threatened to sue the paper into oblivion. She pulled out a notebook. I've been gathering evidence ever since. I know there's a bigger story here. Tom and I exchanged glances. I decided not to reveal my true financial position just yet, but Rebecca could be a useful ally. I'm happy to talk, I said. But I need to understand what they're planning first. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with an official email from the town. The subject line read, "Notice of temporary road closure effective immediately." I showed it to Tom and Rebecca. The email stated that my access road would be closed for infrastructure improvements related to the Riverside expansion project. No timeline was provided and no alternative access was offered. "They're moving faster than I expected," Tom muttered. Rebecca was already making notes. "This is illegal," she said. "They can't cut off access to your property without providing an alternative route or getting proper easements." I knew she was right, but I also knew that with the mayor and council in Eleanor's pocket, legal remedies might take too long. The next morning, I drove toward my farm earlier than usual, hoping to get there before any construction crews arrived. I was too late. As I approached the turn onto my dirt road, I saw them, 3 massive yellow bulldozers, blocking the entrance completely. Workers in orange vests were setting up barriers and road closed signs. And there she was, Eleanor Montgomery, in a pristine white pantsuit that seemed wildly inappropriate for a construction site, overseeing the operation like a general commanding troops. I parked my truck and walked over. The workers glanced at me nervously, but Eleanor's smile only widened when she saw me. "Good morning, Mr. Harper," she said sweetly. "As you can see, we're beginning our infrastructure improvements today. I'm afraid you won't be able to access your farm for the foreseeable future." The pause before the word farm dripped with contempt. "This is my only access road," I said calmly. "I have animals that need care, crops that need tending." Eleanor shrugged, her diamond earrings catching the morning light. "You have 24 hours to remove any personal property. After that, this area becomes part of the Riverside expansion." I pulled out my phone and began taking photos of the scene, the bulldozers, the workers, Eleanor standing there like she owned the place. What she didn't know was that I did own the place, and then some. And now it was time to remind everyone exactly who held the power in Pinewood County. I stood there watching as Eleanor Montgomery gave orders to the workers and bulldozers blocking my driveway, snapping photos with my phone, capturing every moment. "I think I might need to speak with a lawyer," I said evenly, still pointing the camera at her. Eleanor's laugh was cold, like ice cracking under pressure. "You think you can sue?" "Every lawyer in this county works for me," she said dismissively, waving her hand like I was nothing more than an inconvenience. "Besides, everything we're doing is completely legal." I didn't mention the little inconsistency that had been bugging me since our last encounter. Again, she was signing documents with her left hand, even though her driver's license listed her as right-handed. It was a small thing, but those kinds of details tend to add up when someone's hiding something. Instead of calling her out, I simply met her gaze and replied, "Who said anything about suing?" That threw her off just enough to show in her expression, confusion flickering behind the perfect makeup. "What exactly do you think you can do?" she asked, her carefully curated confidence wavering slightly. "I'll handle this my way," I said quietly. This wasn't the angry reaction she'd hoped for, and I could tell it rattled her a bit. As she turned to leave, barking more orders at the construction crew, my phone buzzed with a text from Tom. "Found out why they want your land specifically." "You won't believe it." I looked back at the bulldozers, at my farmhouse barely visible in the distance, and at the life I couldn't reach because of this blockade. This wasn't just about principle anymore, it was personal. Eleanor Montgomery had no idea who she was dealing with. And it was time I started playing the long game. I got back in my truck and drove to town, my mind already forming a plan that would use Eleanor's own arrogance against her. Tom's office was busier than usual when I arrived. Rebecca was already there, laptop open, surrounded by stacks of documents. Tom himself looked worse than he had the day before, paler, with dark circles under his eyes. I wondered if he was pushing himself too hard, but there was a sharp intensity in his focus that told me something else was going on. "Frank," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "We've got it." He slid a folder toward me. "Eleanor and the HOA are practically bankrupt. She's been embezzling funds for years to maintain her lifestyle, private jets, shopping sprees in New York, that ridiculous sports car she drives." Rebecca picked up where he left off. "They need your land specifically because it's the only area with water rights suitable for the resort they're planning to build. They've promised investors a lakefront experience, and your natural spring is the only thing that makes that possible. Without it, the whole project falls apart." She turned her laptop to show me architectural renderings of a massive resort complex centered around an artificial lake positioned exactly where my farmhouse currently stood. "They've already pre-sold memberships to this thing," she added. "If they don't deliver, Eleanor's financial house of cards collapses." I sat back, absorbing all of this. The night before, I'd stayed in a cheap motel, worried sick about my animals and crops. A neighbor had agreed to sneak in through the woods to feed the animals, but it wasn't a sustainable solution. I'd placed a framed photo of my late parents on the nightstand. The farm had been in my family for generations before I sold it, and then rebought it through a shell company years later. Looking at their faces, I had whispered, "I wonder if I'm doing the right thing, holding on to this land, only to lose what matters most." "So now, what was our plan?" Tom leaned forward. "We could file for an emergency injunction citing illegal road closure, but with the judges in this county, it would take weeks to get a hearing." Rebecca nodded. "And by then, they'll have demolished your house and claimed it was dilapidated and dangerous." I thought for a moment, then made a decision. Before I left this morning, I placed thermal trackers at key locations around my property. If they try any sabotage, we'll have evidence. Tom raised an eyebrow. "Expecting trouble?" I shrugged. When dealing with desperate people, always expect the worst. Later that day, I attended the town council meeting, hoping to speak during the public comment period. The chamber was packed, unusual for these typically sleepy meetings. I noticed several Riverside Estates residents, easily identifiable by their expensive casual wear and luxury watches. Mayor Bill Anderson, a man whose spine had apparently been replaced with a wet noodle years ago, called the meeting to order. When the time came for public comments, I raised my hand and stood, but Mayor Anderson conveniently failed to see me. After recognizing 3 Riverside residents who spoke glowingly about the economic benefits of expansion, he abruptly closed the comment period. "We have a full agenda today," he said, avoiding my gaze entirely. The next morning brought disaster. I received a panicked call from the neighbor checking on my animals. "Frank, you need to get here now. Something's happened." I rushed to my property, parking at the roadblock and hiking in through the woods. What I found made my blood boil. Someone had sabotaged my irrigation system, flooding the lower field where most of my animals were kept. 2 of my goats had drowned, and my chicken coop was underwater. But what caught my eye immediately were the footprints, and they led straight back to Riverside Estates. Even more telling was what my thermal trackers had captured, nighttime footage of people in uniforms with HOA compliance, emblazoned on the back, deliberately opening valves and redirecting water flow to cause maximum damage. One figure was clearly giving orders, and though her face was partially obscured, the distinctive white pantsuit and imperious gestures were unmistakable. As I stood looking at the devastation, holding the sodden body of a baby goat I'd helped birth just 2 months ago, my hands trembled with a mixture of grief and rage. For the first time, I questioned whether this fight was worth it. "Don't give up, Frank," Rebecca said when I showed her the footage later. "This is exactly what they want, to break your spirit." Her own determination seemed to have intensified since our last meeting. "I've been thinking," she continued. "Eleanor keeps insisting you're violating HOA rules, but your property isn't part of their association. What if we use that against them?" I looked at her curiously. "How?" She smiled. "You've got land facing the entrance to Riverside, right? Land that definitely isn't in their jurisdiction." I nodded slowly, beginning to see where she was going. "I have contacts at Liberty Billboards," she said. "How would you feel about sending a message that Eleanor can't tear down?" I chuckled as we finalized the billboard design. "I've lived through the startup wars," I told her. "I've been sued more times than I can count. But this is the first time I've seen the law weaponized like this." The next day, residents of Riverside Estates woke up to a massive billboard at the entrance to their community. In bold, cheerful letters, it announced, "Coming soon, Harper Acres, a community without HOA fees, hidden costs, or bullying. Pre-sales begin next month." The billboard included a website and a phone number that went to a voicemail I'd set up. It was positioned on a small parcel of land I owned directly across from the Riverside entrance, land that was definitively outside HOA jurisdiction. The reaction was swift and furious. Eleanor called an emergency HOA meeting that evening, which one of our new allies inside Riverside secretly recorded. "This is an outrageous attack on our community values," Eleanor shrieked, her carefully cultivated poise cracking. "We will use every legal means at our disposal to shut down this farm person." Several residents, however, asked uncomfortable questions about the HOA's finances and the increasing monthly fees. Eleanor deflected with vague references to infrastructure investments and community enhancements. As the meeting was breaking up, my phone rang with an unknown number. "Mr. Harper," said a hesitant voice. "My name is David Marshall. I live in Riverside, and well, I'm not the only one who's unhappy with how things are being run. Eleanor raised our fees by 30% last quarter with no explanation. We'd like to talk." Meanwhile, Tom had discovered something potentially explosive. Eleanor's signature on several land transfer documents didn't match her signature on older records. "I think she might be forging documents," he said. "We need to dig deeper." Little did we know that Eleanor was about to escalate matters dramatically, and in doing so, make her most crucial mistake. The information from David Marshall proved invaluable. As a Riverside Estates board member, he had access to financial records that Eleanor had kept hidden from most residents. She spent $60,000 of HOA funds to renovate her personal pool house, he told me during a clandestine meeting at Tom's office. Another $40,000 went to a community event that was actually her daughter's wedding. The receipts are disguised, but I've been keeping copies. David was a retired accountant who had initially supported Eleanor, believing in her vision for an exclusive community. Now he felt betrayed. "We moved here for security and stability," he said, "not to fund her lifestyle." Rebecca wasted no time putting this information to use. The Pinewood Gazette ran a front-page story titled, "Questions Arise Over Riverside HOA Finances." The article didn't directly accuse Eleanor of embezzlement. That would have risked a libel suit, but it raised enough questions to make residents uneasy. It also mentioned the increasing pressure on surrounding farmland and the mysterious road closure that had cut off access to my property. The story included quotes from environmental experts questioning the impact of rapid development on local watersheds. It was skillfully done, implying connections without stating them outright. During her investigation, Rebecca made an interesting discovery. While reviewing financial documents, she found statements addressed to someone named Bethany Winters. But the account contained a photo ID that looked remarkably like Eleanor. "It could be nothing," she said. "Maybe a maiden name or a relative who gave her access to an account." "But something feels off," I agreed. The discrepancies were adding up, the left-handed signatures despite being registered as right-handed, the inconsistent handwriting on documents, her avoidance of photographers at public events. Eleanor Montgomery was hiding something. But we didn't yet know what. Her response to the newspaper article was predictably aggressive. She filed a defamation lawsuit against both Rebecca and me, claiming we were engaged in a malicious campaign to undermine community development. The lawsuit sought $2 million in damages and an immediate injunction against further harmful publications. It also demanded that my property be condemned through eminent domain to ensure the completion of vital infrastructure improvements. The legal papers were delivered to my motel room by a smirking process server who seemed to enjoy his work a little too much. That same day, I received devastating news about Tom. He asked me to meet him at the hospital rather than his office. I found him in a private room, hooked up to monitors, looking friendlier than I'd ever seen him. "Cancer," he said simply when I entered. "Stage 4, spread to the liver." I sat heavily in the chair beside his bed. "How long?" "Doctors gave me 3 months about 6 weeks ago," he said. Then, with a grim smile, he added, "But it's worse than I let on. Realistically, I've got about 3 weeks." I didn't want to worry you when we had so much work to do. I was stunned, but Tom wasn't finished. "We need to accelerate our plans, Frank," he said. "I want to see Eleanor taken down before I go." And with that, we knew the final phase of this battle was about to begin, and we were running out of time.